I guess I better start off by repeating my declaration that you will never see me in an ugly Christmas sweater. Or correction, a so-called ugly Christmas sweater. This, on the other hand, was a gift from my mom last Thanksgiving. So obviously it has some special meaning nonetheless. Yeah, because I did actually grow up in the 1970s and I remember WKRP. Hi there, and welcome everyone, and thank you very much for surviving another Thanksgiving weekend and Black Friday and all the rest of that stuff. And now here it is Sunday night, and I chose this Sunday night to go live for a couple of reasons. One of which is, unfortunately, I'm a week late, and the reason for that is because 1 week from 5 weeks before Christmas is a tradition in jolly old England known as Stir Up Sunday. That's Stir Up Sunday. And on that day, the folks who still follow this tradition start preparing the annual Christmas plum pudding. That was last week. I'm running a week late because several years ago, I did a video on doing a plum pudding, which turned out rather well. And at that time, I calculated that 5 weeks before Christmas then was the day after Thanksgiving. And I thought, not the day after, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. And so I thought that, spending the last Sunday after Thanksgiving putting together a Christmas pudding would be really a nice tradition. And so because of that, I aimed for today and I missed Stir Up Sunday. But that's all right, because in a way, we are and we're not preparing a Christmas pudding anyway, because as the title of this video says, we are going the American method and making one of those dreaded bricks that everybody knows as fruitcake. But nonetheless, there are a couple things I did want to say about that, and then we will get going. One of which is, of course, the difference is we will be making that in cast iron. And in fact, this is a good excuse to bring out a cast iron bundt pan. This is the Lodge cast iron bundt pan that they produced about 2 years ago. From what I understand, its production ceased about a year ago, and they have since sold out once again. So hopefully you took advantage of that and you managed to get a cast iron bundt pan. But then from there, the other thing, of course, is that we are making a homemade fruitcake. And that's really the whole point here. In that homemade fruitcake far, far surpasses those bricks they sell at the store. And really, when it is definitely worth the time and effort to make a fruitcake, because that does make a nice holiday tradition, and the end results are, as I just said, really something that you will not regret. Having said that, let me start a couple of preparations, and I'll show you what I mean. One other piece of cast iron that I'll be using in this. Oh, shut up. One other piece of cast iron that I'll be using in this case is the number 3 Griswold. And this is only because I need to prepare some softened butter for this. So well, I know you could just soften butter in the microwave, but hey, since I'm so obsessed with doing this in cast iron, I mean, why settle for a microwave when you can do it the old-fashioned way? Yes, indeed. We prepare our dishes the old-fashioned way. We burn them. Kudos to anyone who recognizes that little reference. So I'm just putting this on. I'll be quiet. On the stovetop burner and letting the heat of the oven slowly soften that. Otherwise, oh, good. We've got a couple of people. Hello, Alan Cedillo or Cadillo. Hey, can't wait. I never met a fruitcake that I like. Oh, yeah, that's, I guess, another thing is that fruitcake jokes are allowed. Please feel free to let fly with the fruitcake jokes because I'm sure we all deserve them. And yeah, I grew up with a lot of them as well. Um, a lot of the blame for this universal hatred of fruitcake can be laid on the shoulders, in fact, of the late Johnny Carson, whose it was his fruitcake jokes that really made it so popular to hate fruitcake. My understanding is that fruitcake is, of course, more of an American invention as opposed to the British pudding, but it really became despised when they started doing mail order fruitcakes during the early to middle 20th century. And that was, of course, because the fruitcakes had to be preserved long enough to be shipped through the mail in those days. However, preparing your own fruitcake, there are a lot of advantages to that. And the number one being, and that's really, I think, probably the most important thing to understand, is that this is your fruitcake. You can cater this to your tastes, and you can use the fruits in your fruitcake that you want to use, and you can skip the ones that you don't want. So instead of those awful, huge green cherry blobs that we see in those fruitcake bricks at the store, we can now use something that we consider to be much more palatable. So let's see, that would include, time to get a close up here. Thank you once again. And this is because, of course, this is me doing this on a low budget. This is hardly professional, where we can just shift to one up to the next. Come on, there we go. Where we can just shift to the next scene, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I appreciate your sticking along for the ride, folks. And anyway, this gives us a chance to have a close-up look once again at the cast iron bundt pan. Then we will pan over past the microphone to my workspace, where we will be preparing our fruitcake. And fortunately, another reason why I call this a magical fruitcake is we actually got most of the prep work done in advance for once. So I'm not going to spend the next hour or so chopping and chopping and chopping, because this does involve a lot of chopping. However, let's get our fruit mix together, shall we? So the recipe for this is on my website, by the way, and we are going to start out with 2 cups of dried fruit, chopped. In this case, what we decided to use are half a cup of dried apricots. And then we have half a cup of dried peaches. Because, as you know, they all had peaches in jolly old England. Well, that's why this is a fruit cake, I suppose that. Half a cup of dried dates. If you've never had dates, it is worth going out of your way to try them. So they definitely have a unique flavor of their own, but they are, in fact, quite delicious. So now comes the part where you can joke about, well, gee, I've never had a date. Have you? Boy, at this point, people are going to start leaving this live chat in droves. Anyway, the next one is half a cup of dried pineapple. And these are pretty easy to get at the store anyway. As a matter of fact, they've been sweetened with those a little bit of extra sugar. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because this is going to be a cake. And then finally, let's see, I've done, that is 2 cups of dried fruits right there. And then, of course, comes the part that is most infamous. That is the candied lemon peel and orange peel. And here's where I really do want to recommend one thing, folks. This is probably the other reason why people say they all hate fruitcake, even if they don't hate fruitcake. And that is those horrid fruitcake mixes that they sell at Wally World and at the local supermarket. You know the ones in those plastic tubs that probably glow in the dark when the lights go out. If you are going to get yourself some candied orange peel and lemon peel, please don't get that crap. It's much better to go out of your way. And there are places that will sell much, much better prepared and much more tasty lemon and orange peel. So that's one advice. I mean, the reason, so it might be one of the reasons why that fruitcake has the reputation or lack of a reputation that it does have. And finally, from here, we're not done yet. In addition to all that, we've got a full cup of raisins, which, as you know, are very easy to get. Being a little fancy, we could just use 2 cups of raisins, so I'm just going to use another cup of golden raisins, which do taste slightly different. And all of this will be adding a lot of flavor to it. Then they talk about things like currants and prunes and so forth, and you can use the ones you want. I find that I'm not so fond of currants myself. I don't know, maybe because they're a lot drier than raisins, maybe because they're much smaller. So anyway, because of all this, now here we are with 2.5 cups of, no, correction, 4.5. Yeah, that's right, 4.5 cups of dried fruit now. And in addition to all of that, we'll even throw in some candied ginger. This is so much better than the ginger powder. Not that there's anything wrong with ground ginger powder, in that the flavor is much more intense and more sharp. And this is all going to help give this fruitcake a real punch. So this is a heck of a lot of fruit here. And this is one reason why the batter for the fruitcake actually is going to be thick. And this is why fruitcakes sit like a brick and you're not going to see a light, fluffy fruitcake. Because, of course, it has to be thick enough to hold all of this fruit together. But nonetheless, it is still actually very tasty, especially if you make it yourself. And what do we have for comments? Don't get that away from the edge. What do we have right here? Clay and Art. I'm looking for a date. There's a lot of fruitcakes without there being passed around. Yes, I know. I've heard. After we're done with this fruitcake, then instead of they're saying there is only one fruitcake, there will be 2 fruitcakes. Ooh. What are we doing? We're making another fruitcake. Cornbread got stuck in my crusty Wagner molds and BSR. Could it be bad? I didn't heat them up. Okay, in regards to cornbread, the method that I like using is a 2-step process. You do preheat the pan, then you actually put the oil in and preheat that for a few minutes. Put that in the hot pan. Then after all that, you take the extra oil, pour that into your batter and stir that all in. After you've done all that, then you can pour that back into the hot pan, and you will be getting and that should allow it to pop right out. So I hope that helps. What is Collector 34.5? What is wrong with fruitcake? I guess it's like oatmeal raisin cookies. Yeah, I mean, I know it is, of course, to everyone's taste, but that's why we're making this one to our taste, so that it will be some. So that's why I call this a fruitcake for people who don't like fruitcake, because as you see, again, I've gone out of my way to get some fruits that we prefer, because we are the ones who are going to be eating it. And hello, Miss French Twist. The mix is looking good so far. And now that we've gotten this far, now we can put this aside. Oh, and by the way, on top of all that, later on, I'm even going to be throwing in a cup of chopped pecans. So, yeah, that's why they call it nutty as a fruitcake. Now that we've done all that, next step is to start mixing the batter together. And yes, I did not bring out that vintage Pyrex because, as a matter of fact, it's not big enough. I mean, considering all of the batter we're going to have here, it's going to have to be enough to mix all of that fruit together. So I need a really, really big bowl for that. And here's where we get down to what we usually do with some baking, which is just mixing all the stuff together. Oh yeah, how could I forget after all that? I'm also going to be using a chopped up apple too. Okay, now comes the fun part. And sure enough, I did forget one thing. My spatula. Correction, the silicone one. Hate having to run off like that. All right, now for this, we will start out with our 1/2 cup of butter of softened butter, and that certainly is softened at this point. That didn't take long, did it? Yay, cast iron. Not that there's anything wrong with softening your butter in the microwave, but this is definitely, we did not need to do that. And this again was a Griswold number 3. So if you wonder what to use those tiny pans for, that's only one of many uses for it. All right, now we got to get a cup of brown sugar. It's literally the one thing I forgot to get out. My bad. Nonetheless, where are we? Okay. 1 cup of brown sugar. Looks like the half cup's going to be busy. The cup's going to be busy. I'm going to have to do 4 quarter cups. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, a cup of brown sugar, and that's only the beginning. So definitely this is going to be a sweet cake. And yet another reason to look forward to it, I hope. Next up, we crack in 4 large eggs. 1, 2, 3. I guess I mentioned how I've more or less taught myself to crack an egg. I do it on the side of the pan. 4. And the crank part I hold up instead of down and more or less try to just pull that apart. And it's usually pretty successful. So we're off to a decent start here so far. Good. Can't forget this. 4 large eggs, 3½ cups of all-purpose flour. Nice and simple flour. Let me point out now at this point, what's the difference between a fruitcake and traditional holiday plum pudding? And that's where we get into the British puddings, because the British puddings were often made with a lot of breadcrumbs, and there may be flour mixed in, but the big difference between a pudding and a cake was just that. The pudding was made with breadcrumbs, and it was steamed, as opposed to a cake that was made with flour and baked in the oven or hearth, because of course, in the olden days, not a lot of people had ovens other than royalty or the upper class. 1, have to count to 7 here, folks. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. There we are. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. Now let's get this out of the way so that there are no accidents. Always keep your workspace clear. Yeah, look at all this clear. Ha 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 ha. Now from here, half a teaspoon of salt. Oh yes, now we get some salt, baking soda, and baking powder. And here it is. Had everything ready, but I did forget to get this immediately. So I'm gathering these together as fast as we can. Always forget something, no matter what, but nothing major, fortunately. And now we get, ouch. Hello, Michigan, Maine here. Where is everybody from? Oh, all around. Any vanilla in there? You could add vanilla if you want, I suppose. I generally haven't. Maybe because, I don't know, I feel like I don't need it, not with all of the fruit adding flavor to the cake. Half a teaspoon of salt. And then from there, come on, damn screensaver. There we are. Then from there, 1.5 teaspoons each of baking soda and baking powder. Oh yeah, seeing that, I guess I should tell you, this cake rises terrific. I mean, really, we're barely going to have to fill the pan maybe about 3/4 of the way because it is going to rise. I can promise you that. I've made a number of these. This is, as I mentioned, a recipe that I'm rather proud of. There we go. There's 1.5, 3 halves. And not only, as I said, is this a fruit cake that is safe for kids or to take into work because we don't use alcohol. Well, we do use alcohol when it bakes off, but it does not, it does not get you drunk. But it also, as I mentioned, rises terrific. 1, 2, and 3. There we go. And we have those out of the way. And that takes care of, well, our wet/dry ingredients. I mean, after all, eggs are not exactly a dry ingredient. However, it's a start. And then from here, at this point, it's mostly flour, but it's right after this that we will start adding in the wet ingredients. And when you see these wet ingredients, I think you will like them. Where the heck did it go? There it is. Okay, let's get these out of the way. Yeah. All right. Anyway, there's actually a lot to talk about with this kind of a subject, besides fruitcakes and all the fruitcake jokes. I mean, as I mentioned, this did come from the traditional British plum pudding, aka the Christmas pudding. And boy, is there a lot of history about that. I did some research into that several years ago, and there are a lot of really strange and interesting things going on. We go over what most people figure is just a simple Christmas pudding. The next thing to add to this, by the way, is going to be booze, or to be precise, 1/2 cup of spiced rum. And as a matter of fact, I do believe I have to, no, it is, I did crack the seal then. Okay. That makes it easy. And as I said, this alcohol is going to boil off as it bakes. So this is not going to be an intoxicating cake. But there we are. We start off with 1/2 cup of rum, which I'm sure will make Jack Sparrow very happy. And from here, we're going to do 1/2 cup each of milk and honey. Milk and honey, there's a lot of things to be said about that combination. Not to mention, some of it are actually, I guess, even biblical connotations. And yeah, there's a lot of that in this in the British pudding as well. I had to put back the milk right away because what I mean is that over the course of history, especially during the Middle Ages, when church politics were at their height, there were a lot of dictums or other rules set forth for how to properly prepare the Christmas pudding. Among other things, it actually was supposed to have 13 ingredients, and 13 would be to symbolize Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles. And if you didn't have 13 ingredients, you weren't doing it right. Furthermore, stirring this, it would have to be done in a manner from east to west to symbolize the journey of the 3 wise men, or the Magi, to the birthplace of the Christ child, or so the legends go. Now, this is not obviously a place for discussing the truthfulness of the Gospels or anything like that. However, The history and directions for making Christmas pudding are not exactly in the Bible. So rather, there was an awful lot of church politics and other kinds of politics involved with that, especially when you get into places like jolly old England, where, as you know, the Christmas pudding was always very, very popular. There was one of the kings of history, George II or something like that, who he's the one really who popularized the Christmas pudding anyway, in that he actually ordered a Christmas pudding for his coronation, and because of that, he became known as the Pudding King. On the other hand, those who may know British history may have heard of the time when temporarily the crown was overthrown by Oliver Cromwell, the so-called Lord Protector of England, as opposed to any kind of a king or queen. He put a lot of religious requirements and restrictions that had not been done much under the kings in the Church of England, including a ban specifically on Christmas puddings, because apparently, at least in his eyes, the Christmas pudding was a symbol of pagan idolatry. Of course, when Oliver Cromwell met his lovely demise, yeah, those you who know history know about that. The Christmas pudding was certainly brought back, and it has been a centerpiece of many homes ever since. So, while we're waiting, let's see what. When you give a fruitcake as a gift, does it have meaning? I would think so. And here's the part where I'm not really up on the detailed history of the actual tradition. I mean, I learned a few things, historical aspects of it. I would think that there should be actual meaning to giving of a fruitcake as a gift. I mean, of course, in medieval times, cakes were very special because the ingredients were often pretty hard to come by. But nonetheless, as such, so giving a fruitcake, well, especially if it's supposed to symbolize Jesus and the apostles, then I would think, oh yeah, now I remember, I believe weren't fruitcakes or puddings, either way, they were actually part of the wedding dowry, I believe. I believe it was actually traditional for a long time to have fruitcake at a wedding. And in fact, in Jamaica, they still do that. If you've heard of Jamaican fruitcakes, where, as I understand it, especially in modern times, Jamaica is probably the fruitcake capital of the world, even more so than England, in that they make some astounding fruitcakes down there in Jamaica, often packed with tons and tons of liquor. So you might say they're probably the world's most dangerous fruitcakes. But yes, in fact, that's right. Now I remember, in Jamaica in particular, at a wedding, if you don't have a fruitcake at your wedding, it is often said your marriage is doomed and you will not be living happily ever after. Okay, so far, what do we have here? Milk and honey. Okay, so now from here, we're just going to get into some spices. I could use allspice. I'm actually a little more simple than that. So from here, we're going to get into half teaspoons. Here we are. Half a teaspoon each of ground cloves. One of my favorite spices, being a New Englander, that is. Ground cloves. Then we get into 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Because of course, you gotta have cinnamon in your Christmas confectionaries. 1, 2. I'm deliberately not leveling off. There's nothing wrong with using heaping teaspoons here. The more flavor, the better. 1 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. And yes, here's the part where I know you should, and I probably should have actually ground up a nutmeg rather than using this stuff. Nonetheless, in we go. Finally, one little addition that I like putting in because it also adds just a bit more zest to it, and that would be cardamom. 1 teaspoon of cardamom. So there we go. Now this is definitely going to be a cake with some spice to it. In fact, I have made this recipe on a couple of occasions without the fruit. I simply mixed up this batter here and did not put the fruit in, and baked it in the same manner, and it comes out as a very nice and I think tasty spice cake. This is one reason why I'm pretty proud of this dish here. And yeah, it is very thick, as you can see. It has to be in order to hold all of that fruit together. So this is not something you can stir with a handheld mixer, I'm afraid. Maybe a stand mixer, but that's another tradition, of course, that very famous for the traditional Christmas pudding, which, of course, was that the whole family took turns stirring the batter and stirring the pudding. Considering how thick the batter is, you can certainly understand why. All right, so, oh yes, after all this, okay, one other thing we're going to put into this, and that is we're going to do a little bit of zesting. Here's one thing I've really learned to love, and that is using a microplane and zesting citrus, because the guy who invented zesting really was some kind of a genius, in that this here adds so much flavor to your cake that and it does not overwhelm it either. Zesting is amazing because it seems to add nothing but pure orange and lemon flavor, and yet you don't have any of the bitterness that you might expect, especially if you figure, well, I mean, it's the rind, it's not the it's not the tasty insides, and yet what you do get is a lot of orange flavor here. Furthermore, as you can see, it really doesn't take that long to zest an orange of this size. So if you'll be kind enough to hold tight for a few seconds, I'm almost done with this. I'll check the comments again, and then we will go on to the lemon. And from here, we're almost ready to put all of this into the oven. Meanwhile, I do hope folks have been letting their fruitcake stories fly on the chat. I encourage it, in fact. One thing that I've found myself doing each year is the annual Walmart fruitcake sighting. When are those sliced fruitcakes going to show up in the bakery section at Walmart? This year, I actually saw it the day before Thanksgiving, but didn't post a picture of it until the day after Thanksgiving. And there we are. So we've got some orange zest in here right now. Let's see what we have so far on the run. Even though I'm not a rum fan, cardamom is an expensive spice. Well, yes, it can be. Cromwell led the round. Yes, indeed. No cloves, please. Okay, well, for Peg 2 and for Clay and Mr. Gregory, let me say once again, if you decide to make a fruitcake, it is your fruitcake. You can use the spices that you want, and you don't have to use the spices that you don't like. I mean, if you would rather have something else other than spiced rum, for instance, you can do that. If you'd rather use maybe, I don't know, allspice, for instance, instead of the cardamom, then you could certainly do that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Do you place fruit on top of the fruit cake too? You know, I probably should. In which case, if I were to do that, since I'm using a bundt pan for that, I wish I had thought of that. You know, you should have I wish I'd been reminded of that. What you could do is simply take some cherries and put them right here at the bottom of the bundt pan before you actually put in the batter. Instead of zest, use orange liqueur. Yes, indeed. There's one example for you, for instance. Although the zest is a little bit cheaper. I mean, after all, these lemons right now are about 79 cents each or so. I'm not sure how much orange liqueur costs, but I'm betting it's probably more than that. If anything, I think lemon zest probably shows up even better than orange zest, which is why I'm glad to be able to do both in this particular fruitcake here. And again, this does not take long at all. And the zest seems to dissolve completely or is absorbed as the cake bakes, in that even though it looks like you've got little pieces of orange and lemon peel here, I have yet to get any of these things stuck in my teeth at all, no matter what I have used the zest for. And that especially includes a fruitcake or even a plum pudding. As I mentioned, the fruitcake is baked, whereas the plum pudding is actually steamed. Steaming is an interesting cooking method in itself, and I'll be doing that in a couple of weeks with a figgy pudding. But right now, once again, we are just about done here with zesting this lemon. So now we have lemon zest and orange zest. Mix all this together. Boy, this is tough. And if you think this is tough, wait till all of that fruit goes in. Let me make sure I haven't missed anything in the recipe here. Oh, come on. All right, fruitcake. Chopped up. Add. Okay, cream together butter and sugar, eggs, flour, salt, milk, rum, milk, honey. Okay, now at this point, it's time to bring it all together and to take all of that fruit and dump it in. Another good reason, of course, to make it yourself rather than buying at the store, in that people are more likely to eat it if they make it themselves, especially kids. And yeah, we did have fruitcake on a regular basis as we were growing up. My dad, who had some very, shall we say, unusual tastes, he was the guy who loved horseradish on everything. He would go out of his way to get a fruitcake for everyone, store-bought that is, cheap store-bought too, not the really fancy fruitcakes, every year for Christmas. And what's more, he did it for Easter. This is the part I never could understand. For years as we were growing up, on Easter, somehow he would get, among the other things we got for Easter, he would give us this big, horrid, foil-wrapped, egg-shaped fruitcake. You unwrap the foil and it was a fruitcake, and so you had to eat the whole thing. That might be one reason that turned me off of fruitcake for a long time as well. So, did your mother make fruitcake? What inspired you to make fruitcake today? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, today is actually a week after or rather, I had usually used the Sunday after Thanksgiving to prepare the Christmas pudding, because usually that is a tradition known as Stir Up Sunday in England. This year, however, I was a week late, because this year Stir Up Sunday happened to be last week. It's 5 weeks before Christmas, and just because of the way the calendar is, that means this time, as I said, I'm late. There, is the batter thick enough? Well, actually, we've got 2 more things to add to this yet. One of which is I like to take a freshly chopped apple and put it in. Because while they do sell those dried apples along with the other kinds of dried fruits, I prefer to use a fresh apple. Not to mention that it's, well, fresh. It's also a lot cheaper than buying dried fruit apple slices. And considering that these other fruits can be kind of expensive, this helps to save a little bit of money as well. All of this is going to bake through, and that was a Granny Smith apple, of course. All of this is going to bake through, and then we will have ourselves a fruitcake. But anyway, that's the reason why I decided to make a fruitcake today. Have you tried using your hands to stir this mix? Might be easier. Well, it might actually stir, but this is a very sticky batter at this point. I will get it all over my hands, kind of like this. And having done all this, we've got one last thing. Chopped pecans. You can use pecans, walnuts, mixed nuts, whatever nuts you want to use in yours, because there is a reason why they use the phrase nutty as a fruitcake. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is why I have little doubt this is why the whole family took turns stirring the Christmas pudding, because this is indeed quite an effort to get all of this stuff mixed together. Are fruitcakes always made in a rectangular shape? Well, that I think comes from the mail order fruitcakes. They started doing that around the early to mid 20th century, when they actually did mail order fruitcakes. You could order it through the mail, and this was when mail order was relatively new, I think. And so the fruitcakes, of course, had to be well enough to preserve during the trip through the mail, as well as being convenient enough to package and ship through the mail. So because of that, it's obviously a lot more convenient to have a rectangular brick-shaped fruitcake. However, in this case, we are not making a rectangular fruitcake. Type physics. Never seen one being assembled. It's pretty cool. Yeah, actually it is. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, making it yourself, it really will give a lot more incentive to actually eat it, because this all smells really good. I mean, I've got all these spices in here, that spiced rum, not to mention the citrus. So yeah, this is pretty good stuff here. Let's see. Hostile forces have been spotted outside the facility. Okay. If you work the mix too much, won't it get tough? Well, yeah, I probably shouldn't work it too much more now that you're saying that. Besides, we've got everything here, in which case then, got to put this aside for the moment, somewhere safe. And it's time to get out a cast iron bundt pan. Now, to grease this, I'm going to grease this. Here comes one of those Pyrex bowls. To grease this, I'm going to make what they call baker's goop. And baker's goop is about, here's my tablespoons here. So that means we're going to use, now I've tried greasing and flouring the pan, and I do not want to get flour stains on the finished cake. That's why I'm using baker's goop. 1, 2 tablespoons of flour. Two tablespoons of oil, in this case canola oil. Slow down. I'm telling myself, no need to panic. And finally, 2 tablespoons of shortening, or in this case, Crisco. There we go. And this is actually a trick used by quite often by bakers, where, as I said, if you don't want to get flour stains on the outside of your finished cake, you grease the pan with this stuff. And it should indeed it should melt in, and there's much less chance that you'll have any kind of a residue. Mix it all together. It's really not that hard, as you can see. It's going to be like a paste, and that is what we're going to use to grease our bundt pan. The big lumps in here, as far as I can tell, are not flour. They are shortening, which will not stain, but rather they should melt in. So we're doing pretty good at this point. Let's see. They know. All right, definitely in the realm of a non-Newtonian fluid. Yes, indeed. Are there any other regional variants of fruitcakes that you have made? Well, yes, one year I did actually make the Jamaican rum fruitcake. That had a different consistency, and if anything, it was even heavier and definitely more alcoholic than this kind of a fruitcake. I have not made other regions' fruitcakes yet, unfortunately. It's one of many, many things I have yet to do, and will probably eventually do someday. If anybody else wants to comment about making different kinds of fruitcakes, please feel free to do so. And now at last, take our cast iron bundt pan and start smearing the goop all over. As my understanding is, that is actually the name for it. They actually do call this stuff baker's goop. And it's certainly an appropriate term for it. Especially with a bundt pan, got to be sure you get all of those nooks and crannies. When this is all done and we put the batter in, this is going to be slow cooked. The oven, by the way, is preheated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, not 350, just 300. This batter is going to be so thick that if we cook it too fast or bake it too fast, then we'll have the problem of it being burned on the outside and still underdone on the inside. So instead, we're going to do the low and slow method. Now, if this was a rectangular fruitcake or a sheet cake or something flat like that, you could probably do this in 1 hour and 60 minutes. But for something like this, a deep bundt pan, this is actually going to be in the oven for 90 minutes. After that point, well, we will be done. This is not difficult. This actually isn't that difficult. I mean, the hard part really was preparing and chopping up all of that fruit. But once we did so, I mean, everything I've done here has just been mixing it together. So really, this is actually probably one of the easiest cakes in the world to start off with. This is definitely a cake. This is a cake for beginners. And really, if you want to start off by making a Christmas fruit cake, then, well, it's not a bad way to start. It would make a nice tradition for a lot of people, no doubt. What do we have here? Is there a correlation with rectangular fruitcake and Yule logs? I don't know. Nothing's impossible, I suppose. I'm still thinking that the rectangular fruitcake thing may have more to do with shipping it through the mail. I may be wrong, and that's something would probably be worthy of more research. So. Nonetheless, a bundt pan, of course, has a very attractive design, and as such, that's one reason why I like doing my fruitcake in a cast iron bundt pan. Kind of like a dump cake, kind of. Well, actually, you are quite right, because from here, I always think it's cast aluminum. Yeah, well, yeah, actually, you were right about it being a dump cake, because that batter is so thick and so heavy that you really can't even pour it in to this pan. We're gonna have to scoop it in. Almost done here. I could say we probably are done. Get this out of the way. Now back to the batter. All right, here it is. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. This batter is so thick. No, you can't pour it in. Definitely not. Instead, we got to do it this way. Plop. Boy, doesn't that look appetizing? If it looked nice before, it probably doesn't look so nice now. But still, plop. And don't worry about air gaps either, because as I think I mentioned already, this cake rises terrific. That's the other thing, is that I only need to fill this pan maybe about 3/4 of the way. So even though, and again, I used a really big bowl too, so even though there doesn't look like a lot of batter in the pan, it's actually going to fill this very nicely. Plop. And let's do another plop. But man, does this smell good. Plop. See, I'm actually pressing it down here. So much for those batters of the kind that you're worried that they're going to fall. This is one where you don't have, one thing you don't have to worry about is this cake falling. Plop. 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 Oops, missed a piece. Just trying to get away. And of course, needless to say, the fruitcake jokes that have come fast and furious, especially on TV, have only helped to increase the the rumors and the legends of fruitcake being horrid. I mean, really, why would people go through the time and expense? This fruit, all of this fruit can certainly cost something, of making a fruitcake that is supposed to be horrid, when in fact this is anything but. Because again, we made this ourselves. This is not store-bought. The Walmart fruitcake, up until a couple of years ago, had an expiration date, which they seem to have removed from it now. And the expiration date was always something like May or June of the next year. Now, considering that a rum cake or a Christmas pudding will last for months when it's soaked in rum, this one here had that expiration date without being soaked in rum. So you can only imagine what that is like. All right. And there we go. Let's clean some of this up. My mess, my bad. And I've got a lot of leftover dried fruit to work our way through as well. Could make another fruit cake or just simply munch on it because, hey, it's dried fruit. Anyway, there we are. We've got ourselves the one very heavy fruitcake. So from here, besides your mother, what chef has inspired you the most? It's hard to say. It might easy to say Alton Brown or perhaps Chef John from Food Wishes. So, but I think no. Actually, what's really inspired me the most has not been any particular chef. It has been rather the Cast Iron Cooking Group on Facebook. All of the many wonderful photos and dishes that are being posted on there every single day. That's definitely has inspired me to try a lot of new things. And now, just give me a moment. Is this the foolproof way of making the cake, making sure the cake doesn't stick? Well, that's my hope. Of course, this cake is so thick and heavy that it's almost certain to fall right out of the pan afterwards anyway. But the baker's goop is my way of making sure it won't stick. So now that we've done that, let's get this with wires all over the place into the oven. Oops, including that wire. In it goes. Wow, this is heavy. Where it will be cooking, baking for an hour and a half. Which is getting to about that time anyway, so that means it's going to be done at about 10:30 tonight. Once again, thank you for going along for the ride, this roller coaster ride here. Let me raise this just a little bit. There, much better. Hi. Okay, guys, please support me. Okay, hide that. Sorry, somebody's trying to promote their own YouTube channel, and I'm not interested in that. So, I work to build mine up, but any spammer, no. Okay, Nigella Lawson inspired me. Oh yeah, the hoodie once again. So, as I said, this was a gift from my mom last year, and especially since my mom passed away this year. Yeah, I do miss her, and Christmas especially, I'm going to miss her. So, of course, well, this is something that we all do have to go through, and all I can do is remember the many wonderful times we had. Other than that, let's take a look here, see if I missed anything here. Bricklayer style. I grew up in Francophone community, so we had bûche de Noël, the Yule log cake. Fruitcake was the Anglophone tradition. Yes, that's true. I have yet to try making a bûche de Noël, unfortunately. That's yet another thing I want to do one of these days. I think, like so many people, I'm really afraid of the part where you have to roll the cake up. But yes, I've had bûche de Noël, and it is wonderful. Another thing that I'm looking to try very soon, I hope, would be making panettone homemade. I imagine the high sugar content made them bacteria proof. Well, that plus the fact that it's dried fruit as well, so that is meant to last a long time. And of course, the plum pudding, naturally, after it had been steamed, you soak it in rum, and then you keep feeding it additional rum each week until Christmas comes along. So by the time Christmas comes along, that pudding is sopped in rum, and that is certainly one way to preserve it, which was probably why they did it that way, and then built a tradition around it. Steamed clams? No, I don't like dense cake. I like it fluffy. Well, unfortunately, fruitcake is very dense. If anything, I'm hoping this is a cake, though, nonetheless, that people may be interested in trying, and that's why I call it a magical fruitcake. The magic part is that it's a fruitcake for people who don't like fruitcake. It's something that hopefully people will actually want to eat. When this cake is done and it comes out of the oven, we will be giving it a traditional buttercream glaze. That's going to be in an hour and a half. I'm not asking everybody to stay along all that time because, of course, we are running about an hour into this as it is. So, still, at least managed to accomplish exactly what I'd hoped for. I kind of touched on things like the bits about the plum pudding, about the politics involved, and there have indeed been a lot of politics. The fruitcake jokes, and as I said, this is going to be fruit. Now that this is going to be done, then the world will have two fruitcakes to pass around rather than one. So I'm increasing the fruitcake supply. Of course, if we actually see three fruitcakes and people start making more of these, then who knows? Maybe the world will actually collapse into a black hole. And considering how 2020 has come along, that might not be such a bad thing. And from there, we've got do you have any cooking books or chefs that inspire you? A couple. Julia Child was one of my early inspirations. Then a few years ago, I came across that wonderful cookbook by Vincent Price called A Treasury of Great Recipes. Other than that, the vast majority of the inspiration and the recipes I try, well, they come from the internet. Welcome to the 21st century. Let's see from here. What piece of cast iron is your holy grail? Something you've searched for and never found? That would probably be the BSR number 13-inch camp oven or spider. If you look on my channel, you will see that there is a video there about cooking in Birmingham stove and range outdoor cookware, including a spider. I was lucky enough to find a 13, not a 12-inch, but a 13-inch lid, which BSR only made in their early days. And it would be really nice to have the bottom piece that goes with that. So if there's any kind of a holy grail I might have, it might be that. So thin. Number 30, somebody else wants a 13-inch Griswold skillet. But anyway, I love Julia Child. She lived in Cambridgeport. Yes, as a matter of fact, I just happened to have my wonderful grandmother grew up right by the street where Julia Child lived on, Brattle Street. So no, she didn't know Julia Child. She never even met her. I met Julia Child very briefly when I was a doorman at the Harvard Square movie theater in the early 90s. She and her husband came in and they saw almost all of Woody Allen's movies in particular. So that was long before I knew, learned how to cook, that is. But Julia Child was, of course, Julia Child, and everybody knew her. She was also very polite, too. Also there on right now in on Brattle Street in Cambridge, there is a street. There is a very famous and very expensive meat market called Savonar's that I have been to, and that is worth a trip to go to if you want to see a place that actually sells ostrich meat, imported ostrich, kangaroo, wild boar, and other exotic kinds of meats. But nonetheless, used to go to the Brattle Theater. Oh, yeah, no, I remember the Brattle Theater. But nonetheless, though, well, as I said, today again is a week after Stir Up Sunday. And that, of course, was a tradition to start the Christmas pudding. And if anybody wants to go the traditional route and make their own actual pudding this year rather than a fruitcake, well, it's not too late to do so. Take the time and put the ingredients together and you will have something wonderful. Right now, though, as it is, I like to think, and I will find out in an hour and a half, if this fruitcake is in fact going to be something wonderful. My previous attempts on making this have indeed turned out to be wonderful, wonderful enough that it's a recipe that I'm actually quite proud of. And I do hope this has inspired some folks to, well, consider not all fruitcakes are bad. No, I'm not going to ever say that those bricks of fruitcake at Walmart and other places are anything less than horrid. And I will also say that those horrible nuclear powered fruitcake mixes that they sell in those gigantic bins at, again, at Walmart and other places. I do not recommend using those things for a fruitcake like this. In fact, there's the rub. I mean, again, this is your fruitcake. Use the ingredients that you want to use, and that also means see if you can find something that you will like. The dried fruits that you will like. Go to places where you can get dried fruit, and especially like things like the orange peel and so forth. I guess that's really the whole point, is that the best fruit cake is the one that you make, and that's the one that you are going to enjoy the most. And I do hope that folks have enjoyed this for whatever it's worth. Um, we've got, well, we now have only, oh, good grief. Would you believe it's only a little more than 3 weeks until Christmas? Yes, we're in that time of the year again. The Thanksgiving weekend is now ending tonight. Back to the grind, and things will start jumping once again tomorrow. So all I can ask to everyone is to keep safe. I mean, after all, 2020 has been quite a year, and they say that this winter is going to be, well, a dark one, and one where if you're not careful, something really bad could happen. So please, everyone, keep safe and be well. All right. I think that's really about it. I mean, there really isn't much else to say at this point. So, oh yeah, what temperature is the stove set to? How could I? No, I did mention it before. The stove is set to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, not 350, but 300. We're doing a low and slow baking on this. This is going to be in the oven for an hour and a half. So I hope that helps. More information can be seen on my website too. So, nonetheless, the next up later this week, we have Cast Iron Wednesday, and we will see what happens there. Thank you very much for coming by, everybody, especially on a Sunday evening, and I do hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun, by the way, especially. So, all I can say at this point is thank you very much, and I will see you all on Cast Iron Wednesday. Have a good evening. One moment.